Hi, thank you for watching today's course. So today I'd like to go through and discuss VMware User Environment Manager. In this video, we're going to be covering User Environment Manager version 9.4. However, the topics covered in this video pretty much apply to most current versions of VMware User Environment Manager. So this session would be considered more of a 200 level session. So the assumption is that anybody coming in has a basic understanding of Active Directory principles, has a basic understanding of managing applications in a common enterprise environment. So for today's session, we do have an agenda. I'll introduce myself pretty quickly. Then we'll actually just jump in. I'll give a quick overview of VMware User Environment Manager. This is going to be just a really high-level overview that's going to discuss the product and some of the benefits and everything. Then we'll go through, review the different components, how they work together, and then we'll actually go through and deploy VMware User Environment in a small lab environment. However, the process that we go through here can work in most small to medium-sized environments. And with minor changes, you're able to easily go through and configure replication for larger environments with the principles discussed today. So a little bit about me. I'm John Turner. I'm currently a senior consultant with VMware Professional Services. I come with 20 years of enterprise consulting experience. I really have run the gamut across my career, working in cloud virtualization, a lot in virtual desktop, as well as endpoint management, enterprise directory services, and I've also done a good amount of training and curriculum development. I've supported just about most of the common industries that you can run into in the United States, and I do hold a number of industry certifications, including VMware certifications, Microsoft certifications, and also some Cisco certifications. So let's start with the basics. What is VMware User Environment Manager? VMware User Environment Manager, honestly, is probably one of my favorite products to go through and deploy for Horizon Suite because it's truly designed to give a seamless experience to your end users, no matter what device they are connecting from. So if they're sitting at their work computer, they'll get the exact same experience in Microsoft Word that they would get if they were VPNing in from home at night, or if they were connecting to a VDI environment inside of their environment. So things like the custom dictionary files or Outlook signatures, stuff like that, we'll be able to follow a user no matter where they log in from, whether it's their iPad at home or, like I said, their actual physical desktop that's sitting at their desk in the office. And UEM really helps bridge the gap and provide a seamless way to be able to get to this unified user experience. And it really is able to go across your desktops, no matter where your desktop is, whether it's in the cloud or if it's a physical desktop. And on the screen is just some of the examples of the different things that you're able to go through and configure by implementing User Environment Manager. These things include printer settings, network mappings, just about anything that you can configure a custom application setting that has ADMX-based templates, you can configure those through UEM. Smart policies, you can do application whitelisting as well as blacklisting, and then you can also capture application settings. So there is actually quite a bit that User Environment Manager is able to do natively out of the box. And I do plan on doing another video session that kind of really goes through the nuts and bolts of all the different capabilities that UEM is able to do across all the different aspects that this slide highlights. So stay tuned and watch for that one to come. But let's really talk about where VMware User Environment Manager fits in the enterprise. If you think of a traditional desktop, a desktop's going to have their underlying operating system. Then they'll have the user's applications as well as the user's data and files. And associated with the user's data files and the applications are a number of settings. So if you really think about it, if you boot up your computer brand new out of the box and launch Office, you get all these first run dialog boxes and everything. And that's pretty much what will happen on every desktop computer that you log into across an enterprise if you've never logged into it before. So UEM really sits at this little settings box here, and what it helps complete is it helps bridge the gap with user roaming across an environment. No matter if they're logging into a VDI desktop or a terminal server session, or even their desktop sitting on their desk in the office. And UEM is able to go through and do a number of these things based upon triggers. So we can really trigger different refreshes based upon events, whether a user locks the screen, unlocks the screen, or if the user logs off versus logging on, stuff like that. We're able to go through and we're able to look at their applications, and we can profile the applications. So if you think about things in terms of Microsoft Office, oftentimes users will go through and create a custom dictionary file for common words that always show up as misspelled. And then there's also the Outlook signatures and everything. So every time a user logs into a different machine, these things have to be configured. Well, with UEM, we can capture those settings and reapply those settings no matter where the user logs in. So it is truly a seamless experience. It doesn't look like they're logging into that system for the very first time. So the way UEM does this, it really breaks down into two different parts. One is the application personalization, and then the other one is general settings, which I really relate more to Active Directory style settings, and you'll see that here in the next slide. But on the application personalization side, this really is meant to decouple the application from the operating system. So any of the different configuration changes that the user may do just while using the application, we're able to capture those, whether it's a registry setting or if it writes files to a local hard drive or stuff along those lines. We're able to manage these things when Windows logs on, and then we capture all the settings that logs when the user logs off. It gives dynamic application personalization. So you can actually apply different customization settings based upon environmental information. So you can map specific printers based upon specific locations that a user connects from. And depending upon your application, we can manage these settings across whatever Windows platform. So if you've standardized on Office 2016 across your environment, whether it's installed on a Windows 7 desktop or a Windows 10 desktop, we can manage those settings going across. And as we mentioned in a few slides ago, we're able to manage any desktop endpoint inside the environment, whether it's physical, virtual, or a cloud desktop. This can be Windows 7, Windows 10, Windows XP if it's still out there, and then also like Windows 2012 terminal servers, Windows 2016 terminal servers. And where I really see this product really shining for a lot of customers is being able to migrate from physical desktops out to the cloud, so that user has a seamless experience. All their files, all their settings and everything, just follow them to their new desktop. So let's talk a little bit about the actual settings that can be done. This is what I mentioned feels a little bit like what you're able to do through Active Directory. But what's nice about UEM is you're able to really give a lot more context-based configuration to these things. So you can map drives based upon where a user is connecting from. You're able to only map drives if the user is connected on their local through a local network, but not if they're connecting in from the outside world. So that's just some examples from the drive and printer mappings perspective. We can also control shortcuts. And as I mentioned, I'm going to do another video that really gets down into the nitty gritty of all the different capabilities, but you're able to manage drive and printer mappings. You're able to manage where the shortcuts are, whether they appear on the desktop or if they appear on the start menu. You're able to do different configuration settings based upon triggered tasks. You can configure file type associations based upon what applications are installed. So there's a lot of customization that this product is able to do. And what you'll see is the architecture overall for a product that has this many capabilities is actually pretty simplistic. So let's talk a little bit about the different components. So first one is a management console. This is just a standard small install console that is installed on a management machine, and it manages the overall configuration of UEM. Then you have the client. The client is installed on whatever your endpoint is. Your endpoint can be a virtual desktop image. Your endpoint can be an actual physical machine sitting on somebody's desk. It can be a laptop that's out in a corporate environment. It can even be an RDSH host. Then you have the application profiler. So the application profiler will be able to go through and profile those applications to determine the settings that need to be captured to give a user a seamless experience. We're not going to get into what the profiler can do too in depth in this series, but we'll have another session that really talks about the application profiler later on. Then we also have the user environment manager sync tool. So this is primarily meant for laptop users that may have limited bandwidth or are online and offline. So we can still apply UEM configuration settings, and we can sync that back from mobile users out in your workforce. And then also available is a user environment manager help desk tool, and this is actually a tool meant for your support organization. They can go through and take a look at profile sizes. They can look at the different logs from when applications are being launched, and they can even go through and revert settings to a previously known good state using this tool. And then we also have a end user facing version of this tool that allows end users to be able to go back and restore configurations for those a little bit more advanced users. I haven't deployed this one out there too much in corporate environments, but the one time that I have seen this actually used quite a bit has been more in development environments where they want to be able to roll back different settings that they did in their configuration. So it is useful if you have users that are a little bit more tech savvy, but if it's a standard environment, more than likely you're not going to give them this capability. So let's talk a little bit about the architecture. And as I've mentioned a couple times, the architecture for a product like this is actually rather simple. So at the heart of it, it is 2 Windows-based file shares. These file shares contain centralized configuration files, and then it contains user-based information. There is no database that is utilized to support this. All you really need to do is have the UEM agent deployed, configure a group policy object that configures the UEM agent to look at the central config share and the user shares, and it pretty much goes through and works. So some technical requirements, just what is required underlying. So you do need Active Directory. This is preferred method, especially if you want to use group policy. There is a capability of doing AD mode, which does local policies and local configurations for UEM. Not going to get into it too much here. We're going to be talking mostly about the group policy mode. Then you have the central configuration share. This is where all the configuration files live. This is read-only for your end users, and administrators have full control. Then you have your user share. Your user share, this is where the actual personalization data is copied back up to. So there will be an individual folder for each user using UEM. And these get created automatically, and this data is backed up as users log on and log off. And then you can also do folder redirection. We'll talk about this quite a bit more in another session on UEM. So I started highlighting a little bit about the permissions that are required for this. So permissions are actually pretty simple. For your central config share, all users need to have read capabilities to that. And then your user share, basically what you do is at your very top level, you give everyone the ability to see what folders are there. And then each folder is created with permissions only allowed for that specific user to be able to access the share. So we'll go through during the demo and actually set this up here in a couple minutes. So one of the next pieces of configuration for UEM is GPOs. And really, there's only 3 configurations that are required for this. There are a few more that we'll go through during the demo that we'll pretty much talk about. But basically, you have to tell the UEM agent where those shares are and the folders that are associated with them. And as long as that GPO is being applied properly to a machine that has the agent on it, UEM is going to do its thing. So let's go through and install this. So I have a small home lab that I'm doing this demonstration on. It consists of a single Active Directory domain. I do have a SQL server and a full Horizon environment configured. I am co-locating the UEM configuration and profile share with my SQL server just due to the limited resources available in the lab, but the recommended process would be that you would have a dedicated high-speed share somewhere out there, and I highly recommend using SSD disk for anything that is user configuration related, especially if you're doing this in the VDI environment. And then I have a standard Windows 10 parent image that we'll be going through and using for this. So we're going to go through the full installation here during this session. It should go pretty quick. So we'll go through, I'll demonstrate how you configure the UEM config shares and the profile shares. We'll install the management console. We'll install the UEM agent on a VDI desktop parent machine. This process is no different than if you're installing it on a physical machine. Then we'll go through, we'll configure the GPO, and we'll do some testing with this. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so here we have my SQL server, which, as I mentioned, also is doing double duty as my file server here. And I have already pre-created 2 folders. So these are just 2 folders I created by right-clicking, doing new, creating a folder. So let's talk about these 2 folders that I'm creating here for a second. So as mentioned in the previous slides, there's the UEM configuration folder, and then there's the UEM profiles folder. Configuration folder stores all configuration information from UEM. These are the settings that get applied to the agent, telling the agent what settings it applies to the user session and what settings it captures when the user logs on and logs off. And then the UEM profile share in this case is where all that data will actually be stored, that stores the individual user customization. So what we're going to go through and do here first is we're going to set up our security appropriately. So just going here, and I like to disable all inheritance and start everything brand new. That way, you know for a fact that you have your permissions configured properly. So this is the UEM config. It is probably the easiest one to go through and set up. So I have created an Active Directory group called VDI users. UEM users, sorry. So basically, we're going to give UEM users the ability to read this folder. And we say, okay, and then I'm going to add my administrators group. And I give my administrators group full control over this. So after you have your NTFS settings, then you go through and you configure your share settings. I always do advanced sharing, so let's share this folder, UEM config. I always do these as hidden shares just because I'm that way. And then from a permissions perspective, we add UEM users, have the readability, and then we add our administrators group here with full control. So that's permissions for the first folder that needs to be configured. Pretty simple. So the next one gets a little bit more complicated, but we'll step through this one pretty much the same way that we stepped through the other one. So go through here, security, we disable inheritance, we remove everything there. So the first one that we do is we give our domain administrators or our administrators full control of this solution. Now, you can go through and make it so that your administrators cannot see user data. That's a more advanced topic. We're not going to talk about it, but just so you know, UEM profiles folder follows Microsoft's roaming profiles permission structure to a T. So everything that I'm going through and configuring here aligns exactly with Microsoft best practice for roaming user data. So we give full control to everything. The next one, we're going to give system full control to everything, because that way the system's able to go through and create folders on our behalf and everything. Next, we select our principal of creator owner, and we give creator owner full control to subfolders and files only. And you'll see why in just a second here. So we say okay for that. And then we select VDI or UEM users. This is just my UEM users group. And for this one, we show advanced permissions. We apply it to this folder only, and it needs the ability, and these people need to be able to create folder and append data. So we're giving a user the ability to create a folder here. Once they create that folder, they're the creator owner, so therefore they have full control to that folder that they just created. So that's basically what we went through and did. And as you can see, everything here now is created. The next thing that we need to do is we need to create our share. So again, I like using hidden shares, so I just add the $sign after that. Then we go to permissions. So permissions here are your administrators group, you give them full control, and then your UEM users group, you also give them full control. So you can probably scale this back to change, but at the end of the day, users are creating files or creating folders inside of this share. So they need to be able to have those gateway permissions where they can do it. So that's why it looks like it's a little less secure, but it's not, because of our NTFS permissions that we have backing this up. So after we go through and we've done that, that's all that needs to be done for our shares. So our next thing is let's actually go through and install the UEM management console. So It's a pretty quick install. I already downloaded the MSI file, so go ahead and you run the installation. You accept the license agreement. You tell it the location that you're going to install it to, and you choose custom. And in this case, all we're doing is we're installing the UEM management console. So we're taking off the Flex engine. This is the agent. We'll install that here in just a few minutes. So we go through, we install. Hey, it's installed. It's on there. So pretty quick install. And as we'll be able to see here, we have the management console. I always right-click, do run as administrator. I like getting into a consistent feeling like that. So here, once we launch the console, we go to that share that we just created. So in this case, and always use the UNC path to get to it. So in this case, my server name is NHL-SQL UEM config, and I created that as a hidden share, so I do put the $ after it. I always use fully qualified domain. If you have a good DNS resolution architecture, that's not an issue, but I like doing it, again, just to be consistent. So here, after that's in there, I click OK. If it comes up and doesn't give any errors, that means I have my permissions configured properly there. I leave all the default options here. We'll go through and talk about these in another session. But you click OK. And then to kind of finish off the console install, I always click this easy start button. This pre-populates a lot of generic settings. So you choose your different versions of Office that you'll have deployed in your environment, and you click OK. And it just goes through and creates some of these default application profiles for you. Again, this is more of an advanced session that we will go through and cover in another video. So at this point, we've gone through, we've created the shares, we've installed the management console. Now we need to go through and install the agent. So here we are on my parent VDI desktop, and we're just going to go through and install the UEM agent here. So pretty much same process as installing the admin console. You just launch the MSI installer. So we go through, accept the licensing agreement, choose the default location. I always do custom. So as you can see here, now we're going to be installing the Flex Engine service on this desktop. So we just go ahead and choose next. Since we're installing this on VMware, on a VMware Horizon machine, I don't require a license file, but if you're installing this on a physical desktop image, you will require a license file. And then you go ahead and click install and accept all the different pop-up messages that appear and finish. Now, it doesn't prompt you for a reboot, but I always go through and make sure to do a reboot right after completing the installation of this. Okay, so in the back end, I've gone through and I've actually started pushing that parent image out through my Horizon environment. And while that push is going through and happening, what we're going to go through and do is we're going to go through and complete one of the last primary configurations for UEM, and that's going to be the GPO configuration. So I've gone through and I've already imported the UEM ADMX files into my Active Directory environment. If you need to go through and do this, please reference the installation instructions. It'll tell you how to get them in there. I've imported the ADMX files, and I've created a blank GPO here, and I've linked it to my Active Directory OU that's going to be housing these VDI desktops. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go through and edit this GPO and configure the settings to tell the UEM agent where to find the configuration shares. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through here and we are going to expand policies. We're going to expand our administrative templates. We are going to expand VMware UEM. So these are the UEM configuration settings, which we're going to need to configure. So the first one is Flex Engine. So Flex Engine, we need to tell it where the Flex configuration files exist. And what you do here is you put in / your server name, and then you put in your UEM config and $/ and then /general. It is very important to make sure you have the general folder in there. So that's the first one that you have to go through and configure. The next one that you want to go through is you want to tell it where the profile archives are. So this is a user by user configuration, and this is that UEM profile folder. So in this case, so UEM profile $, and then / username %. So this will create a folder for each individual user, and then / archives. So this just says that this is the archive location. So at this point, when you're doing this configuration, I highlight most of this and copy it because people do this a few times. So I apply and OK. So the next one is profile archive backup. So I always configure this. It's not required, but this goes through and creates multiple backups for user settings. So if you think about somebody changing settings in Microsoft Word, they can change their custom dictionary, and then they can go through and they can change their default font and everything else. So each one of those settings changes is considered a change, and we're able to specify, hey, if you make X number of changes, we're going to keep a few copies just as backups. So normally I do 2 to 3 for most environments and just leave it at that. So you say there. So the next one that we need to go through and configure is I always configure Flex Engine to run as group policy extension. We'll talk about that in another video session, but for purposes of your lab, you definitely want to configure this. And then Flex Engine logging. So let's put in the logging, the log path here. And just give it a name of flexengine.log. You can make it whatever you want. So you go through and configure those. And those are the primary configuration settings for UEM. There are a few recommended settings that you should also go through and configure. So the first one that we'll talk about is the wait for network. So this is a GPO that gets applied. You want to make sure that the network is available for this GPO to apply so that UEM is actually capturing everything. So that configuration here is under administrative templates, system, and then log on. And it is always wait the network. So I configured this previously, but so that's enabled. And the very last one I do, and I'm only configuring this because I'm doing it to a VDI environment, so I configure loopback policy, and that's just so that I make sure all these settings are being applied to every user logging in. So system root policy. So it's this one right here, configure user group policy loopback processing. So I set that as enabled and I tell it to merge. So we'll talk about that in a more advanced session later on. So now we've gone through and we've created all of the GPOs that are required for UEM. So what's next is to go through and actually test this. So I'm going to pause the recording and log into the VDI. Okay, and I had paused the recording, and in the process, in the back end, I logged into one of my virtual desktops. So nice thing is, because we click that easy start button, we know very quickly whether or not UEM is working or not, because it'll go through and create these shortcuts right here on your desktop to these different things. And that's all because we click the easy start button. We can clean this up through the UEM management console pretty easily later on down the line. So with that, we've gone through and we've configured UEM. So this basic configuration would work for most small scale environments, definitely works for all lab environments and everything. We've gone through, and just as a recap, we've configured the shares and we configured the appropriate permissions. We installed the management console. We installed the UEM agent on one of our parent VDI desktop machines. We configured the required GPOs for UEM, and then we logged into to make sure that this works. So I want to thank you for watching, and please feel free to ask questions or leave any comments down below. Thank you very much.